What's going on, guys? Fish here again from Reignite TV, and welcome to another weekly message that I'm doing. This week, I want to talk about the Book of Fish. Or, in your case, maybe it's the Book of You. It's our book. You know, when we look through the Bible, there's 66 books. And, what really kind of caught my eye in this was all these different books named after people. Or at least had a main character. Like, obviously, there's 1st and 2nd Samuel about Samuel. Or Book of Genesis features many different people, but you see Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, Adam and Eve, all these different people that are prominent characters in each of these books. And they all had something in common, which I'll get into in just a second. But I actually want to talk about what can we do in our lives to live just like them. Obviously, we're not going to have our own book in the Bible unless they decide to make a New Testament, but I highly doubt that's ever going to happen again. But what can we do to make impact on our generation that can, be as monumental as, something that Abraham did or Isaac has done in the past? So for the first verse, I want to look at 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong to those who have a heart that is loyal to him. And that's the main verse right there. He looks for us, or he's looking for people that have a heart that's loyal to him. Or in other words, are people after his own heart. Now, some of you Bible nerds out there like myself know where I'm going with this. And we're going to talk about David. When the Bible talks about David and who he is, the main description that they use of him is that he's not strong, he's not fast, he's not big, he didn't slay Goliath, he didn't run, he wasn't king of Israel. But the first thing and most prominent thing we learn about David was that he was a man after God's own heart. And that just shows how prominent he is. He was after God's own heart. He wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, just look at Bathsheba. But he was after God's heart. And obviously the story with Goliath, the whole army of Israel is so scared to go up against a guy that's 9 feet tall and is making fun of them. But when David gets on the scene, he says one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, and I'm just paraphrasing this right here, is there not a cause? He's fighting not just for himself, not just for his country, but for God himself. Because Goliath's over there making fun of the God of Israel, making fun of the Israelites and their way of life and their customs, because he knows they are too afraid to even fight him. I mean, this guy's huge. And then David comes over here, who, not by any stretch of the imagination, was small. I mean, but have you ever seen, the statue of David? That guy's pretty swole. But, he was shorter than most people and still young. He was, a teenager at the time. But he goes up there, not in any sort of fancy armor. He doesn't have a giant sword or a battle axe. He takes a slingshot with 5 smooth stones and only uses one of them to slay the giant. Now, obviously, to use the final blow, it does say that he does take a sword and cut his head off. That's to make sure he's dead. It's kind of hard to kill someone with a slingshot and a stone. But he took down the giant with just a slingshot. It wasn't because of him or what he can do. Obviously, he has to be a good marksman to do that. But he has God on his side because he's fighting for God. And because he's after God's own heart, God is also fighting for him supernaturally by giving him just this amazing ability to use a slingshot and just hit Goliath right between the eyes. Now, like I said earlier, David wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he wanted to do what God wanted him to do. When Samuel's looking for the second king of Israel, he finds all these, he goes to Jesse, David's father, and Jesse has all these sons that are, strong and brave and courageous, but Samuel doesn't choose one of them. And here's why in 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at appearance or physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And after Jesse's done showing Samuel all of his sons except David, because he didn't want to show David because he was still the smallest, Samuel asks, "Do you have any more sons?" Jesse goes, "Yeah, but he's no way he could be a king. I mean, he's too small." So he brings him out, and Samuel says, "That's the one. He's going to be the next king of Israel." I mean, when you look at Saul, he was the tallest dude in Israel. That's the only reason he became king. When the Israelites said, "We want a king like every other nation," they held their own voting right there, and they just picked a guy who was taller than everyone else. I mean, it literally says he was head and shoulders taller than the rest of the nation. So, like, my head's here, he's off screen right now. That's how tall Saul was. So, in conclusion, what can we do in our lives? How can we go after God's own heart? It's by just spending time with him, praying, getting in the word, worship, all that stuff. And what I think is really cool about this is that as we lift up God and give him all the glory and, praise him for our talents, he actually brings us up too. When we look at it, we don't say God killed Goliath or God parted the Red Sea or God did all these miracles. We say the actual person did this. While giving God the fame, they get fame as well. Because we say David killed Goliath, Moses parted the Red Sea, and Jesus and his disciples did all these different miracles. So that's my challenge to you. How can you become a man or woman after God's own heart? What can you do in your lives, in order to not actually have your own book, but what can you do to write your own book? In James 4:8, it says, "God draws near to those who draw near to him." In my translation of that, I say, if you go after God's own heart, God will go after your heart. Because at the end of the day, our book isn't necessarily about us and what we can do. It's still about God and what he can do while through us, but it's still his doing. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this video encouraged you guys. Answer the question, what can we do in our lives to get closer to God's heart? Leave it in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, leave a like, whatever you guys feel like doing. I hope this encouraged you guys, and I'll see you guys next week.